about the role of cloud in law enforcement and evidence, digital evidence. So let me introduce my panel. To my right, my friend Stuart Clark. I'd like to read you a little bit about his background. So Stuart is a security strategist, consultant, and entrepreneur. His 25 years of converged security experience span a diverse spectrum of law enforcement, venture-backed startups, and high-growth, multi-billion-dollar financial services firms. Stuart has served in the role of reluctant CISO for the last 15 years. It's a worrisome role, isn't it?
That's true.
Yeah, never sleep. He is not particularly fond of the role, but gains great satisfaction when his efforts result in measurable improvements in the security and overall maturity of organizations. Stuart's first passion was law enforcement, where he served in multiple leadership roles, including patrol, investigations, crime prevention, crime victim services. He is commissioned as a Texas peace officer and continues to serve the community in a reserve capacity. You can find more about Stuart at his blog, cloudinsanity.com. Not Cloud Sanity, go there.
Not much sanity.
Not much sanity there, but cloudinsanity.com. So welcome, Stuart, and do you have anything you want to add to that? Cover it well? That's driving me nuts.
Yeah, no, you did a great job. I appreciate it. I guess if, one of the things I always get asked is, what was your most embarrassing moment in law enforcement? And quite honestly, it's kind of fun to answer that question, but it's also kind of embarrassing, which is what you would probably guess. But I would say if I had to pick one, it would be, when you're in law enforcement, you deal with bad guys and you have to take them to jail occasionally. When you do that, jail's a secure facility, so you have to lock your gun in a little container before you go into the jail. Well, I found early in my career that it's really important when you're coming out of the jail to actually get your gun from the locker. Because I actually got back in my patrol car, went on shift, went back, did several things that were relatively dangerous to my health, went to eat, and a 7-year-old kid asked me, "Sir, where's your gun?" So so I made a hasty retreat back to the jail, and I think I told somebody about that probably 7 or 8 years later.
Sounds like my damn kid. All right. Welcome, Stan Forney. Stan Forney. So Stan's worked for the Dallas Police Department for more than 24 years. You don't look 35. Wow. All right. Detective Forney has been assigned to several areas within the Dallas Police Department where he gained a high level of expertise in investigating identity theft, check fraud, embezzlement, and internet-related fraud cases. Detective Forney is presently assigned to the Federal Bureau of Investigation's Cyber Task Force, where he investigates state and federal internet fraud and cyber intrusion cases.
Coolest job in the world.
Cool job. We're going to hear more about that, right? He is considered a subject matter expert by the FBI on the Nigerian internet tax fraud. Did anybody got those emails before? Nigerian? Wow. You're the one that has to deal with that? Oh, man, bless you. And he actually investigated the largest internet tax fraud case investigated by the FBI Cyber Division in 2014. Welcome, Stan. Thank you for being here. Anything you'd like to share that I didn't cover well there?
Well, no, you did a great job. Since Christ telling embarrassing stories, and we all have them at that point. One of the worst times I ever had is when I handcuffed a guy, and we were on our way to jail, and we get there, and I forgot my handcuff key. You're calling people, you don't want him to know that you don't have the handcuff key. So yes, I have, there is embarrassing moments there. That happened to be mine. We did get the handcuffs keys off after we got someone to come down, but it did work out, but it was embarrassing.
You got to keep his hands though, right?
You got to keep his hands, absolutely.
All right. Well, my name is Brent Brightwell. I'm with Double Horn. Double Horn is a cloud service broker and specializes in digital evidence management. And we've been offering our solutions to the state, local, and education counties, police departments for over 12 years. Most specifically, the last 5 years around cloud and cloud services. I'm glad I got to do this with you guys, and thank you for coming in. Because it's a different world for me now. When I was a teenager, I hated cops. My best buddy and I, Bob, we hated him. We didn't have any good reason other than we didn't like people, catching us when we did stupid stuff and being told what to do. But I'm gonna change that. Yeah, if you click it in here, it just wouldn't work for me. Yeah, we hated cops. We didn't like getting caught. But now that I'm grown up and I own stuff, cops are actually, I love them, right? If someone's breaking into my house or stealing my car, who am I going to call? Right? Bob's not going to come over. He's a 300-pound, type 2 diabetic who's hooked on Twinkies and reality TV shows. He's not going to come help me. It's the police that show up and come help me. So now I'm a big fan, right? Truly a big fan. But let's be real clear that cops do a very law enforcement is a thankless and very difficult job. You got guys that are out there putting their life on the line, have a high degree of respect for them. They never have enough time, never have enough money, never have enough resources. They may be scared, but they have that "I'm not scared, I'm going to save the world" look, which has got to be incredible, right? And they're always dealing with difficult situations and people. If the cop's there, you're not in a good situation, right? So the people on the other side are struggling themselves. So there's lots of challenges. So that's my lead-in for our first question. We're going to do this in Q&A fashion. Feel free to ask a question. I'll hook you up with a mic there. Just hit there. I'm going to start off, though, with Stuart and Stan. The question is, media coverage of recent critical incidents between law enforcement and the public seem to highlight a strained relationship. Can you share your perspective and help us identify a root cause and some possible solutions? And you can cure cancer.
Yeah, right.
Okay.
It's not tough at all.
No, not at all. Go ahead, though. What do you think we could do? Does technology have a play? You want that back?
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, that'd work. Yeah. Yeah, thanks for the light question. So I actually I've done a lot of research around this recently leading up to this and some things that I'm doing in the future. But I think it's really important to understand where we stand in this country right now. This year there's something like 750,000 sworn law enforcement personnel in the United States, compared to a total population, U.S. population of 324 million. That's 2.3 officers for every 1,000 people. And what does that mean? That's just a number. But to highlight that there's this concept, and I think it's come into everybody's consciousness in the last couple of years at least, of the thin blue line. And what is that? I mean, what is the thin blue line? And well, if you look at 324 million compared to 750,000, that's a pretty thin line. So I think it's really, really important to understand that our policing model in this country only works if people voluntarily comply with the law most of the time. So if we get to a tipping point where a certain number of people choose not to comply with the law, then our policing model no longer works, it breaks. That's called chaos. And so those are some of the things that we should be thinking about in this country. We simply do not have enough police if we choose not to voluntarily comply with the law in sufficient numbers. I was thinking, as I was walking in today, I'm not sure I saw a police officer in this entire convention center as I was walking today, and that's because we are all voluntarily complying with the law. The other point that I wanted to make is that that's all well and good, but that's not really the root problem or solution. In 2015, 986 people were shot and killed by police, according to the Washington Post. In that same year, 153 unarmed people were killed by police. Think about that, 153 unarmed people were killed by police. Now, unarmed doesn't necessarily mean not dangerous, so we need to be really careful, because there were over 100 people that were actually killed by strangulation, so just because, you have to be very careful with terms. But it's still, for me, it's a shocking number. As of this afternoon, this year, we've lost 123 law enforcement officers in the line of duty, 70 by gunfire or assault. It's reported that ambush-style attacks are up 167% this year. And what that means in real numbers is that 16 law enforcement officers, and that includes 5 of Stan's co-workers that were killed earlier this year in Dallas. And at the end, boy, it's sobering if you think about it. And so I would encourage all of us just to stop and think about that for a moment, right? As we talk about kind of the root cause and what's causing all of this and what the solutions are. But we're living in a crazy world where that can happen. I mean, what are we doing to ourselves and to the country? And so it's important to understand that the problems we face, it's not just between the police and the citizens. The problems actually intersect, but they transcend the thin blue line. They're much bigger and deeper problems and root problems that we have to solve. We have a violence problem, in my opinion, in this country. We have a mental health crisis in this country that we don't want to talk about. We seem to not want to talk about. And a lot of those people, in my professional experience, are left at the doorstep of police, and it creates very difficult situations. So we want to treat the symptoms and not the cause, and law enforcement is in the middle.
Yeah, my perspective is that once we look at policing at that point right there, and how police have handled the public at that time, we'll go all the way back to the early '90s. That was the first time that policing was actually challenged, and it took technology actually challenging. It was a guy walking down the street with a huge VHS camera, and under the Rodney King situation at that time. When the public saw that, the public was outraged. Everybody was upset at that point. And what that did was, at that point, that began to make the public begin to question law enforcement at that time. And me personally, I think that technology, even from that standpoint, with people being able to get a look at it, which at one time we didn't even know a police officer. We only knew police officers when we were in trouble. When you start talking about in the 60s, the 70s, and the 80s, right up into the 90s at that point, police were not, we didn't know anything about them. We never, if we had a family member or whatever at that point, we would kind of just like hey, we see you when we need you, and that's kind of it at that time. Even the police didn't even approach people. So after the Rodney King thing, you begin to see the challenging of authority at that point. And did the police handle it? I don't think they handled it too well at that point. So, and then after that, we begin to see the O.J. Simpson trial. Technology again, but whatever you feel about the O.J. Simpson case at that point, the evidence was on trial. When the evidence was on trial at that time, the evidence didn't stand up in court at that time. And we see what happened. But the issue at that point, people begin to distrust police again, because at that point they were saying they were putting evidence on people, they were doing this at that point. So there goes police again. The public began to see these things about police, and that was probably one of the most televised court cases ever within our history. If we ever went to sit down and watched a court case, I think everybody watched that case. So in essence, what we did was we put law enforcement on trial again. And you know what? They failed. So I think with that, and then with the element of technology, cell phones, people being able to film everything that's kind of going on at that time, I think that people begin to see the actual, the bad part, the things that go on inside of the family that nobody knows and nobody talks about. I think that that's what happened at that time, and it became a conversation. If anyone can remember the kid that played for the kid that hit his girlfriend for the Baltimore Colts. The Baltimore Colts had already handled that situation at that point, but when the video came out, it was different. It changed the whole element of that. But that's what's going on in law enforcement. We're beginning to see things that we don't normally see. I could probably point to 10 different people in here and ask you, have you ever seen anybody fight? Have you ever seen a physical fight? Has anybody just seen a, but you think of the people that haven't seen one. When you see something like that, it doesn't look good. I don't care. And when you see a police officer doing it at that point, it definitely doesn't look good. So we're beginning to see these things, and we're beginning to make our decisions on it. Now, when we have an avenue like Facebook at this time, which is actually dictating the minds of generations of people at this time, I think that has something to do with what's going on with the relationship within police. And it goes again, we're talking about technology. I'm not talking down against technology. I'm actually talking good about technology. What I'm saying about technology is it makes you pure. Even an email. If you write an email and you're saying something you really don't want to say sometimes, it's out there. And because it makes you pure, and it even makes you think about what you're going to write, what you're going to talk about. One of the bigger things when we start talking about video cams on police officers, that makes people behave. I mean, it really does. I mean, we have to go back out to patrol in Dallas about a week. Every quarter we have to go out like once a week. And it gives me an opportunity to really get back in and see what's going on out in the community at that time. But one of the things, I see these young kids come up with a camera. Man, they're, hello ma'am, how you doing, sir? Are you, I mean, then he takes that thing off and he's another person. So that's what I'm talking about, technology. Technology makes you pure. You have no other way but to be pure. Excuse me.
But don't you think sometimes it skews things? Like they say right now crime is down, murder is down, but they see these incidents and it seems to inflate the problem in people's minds.
Absolutely, and because usually you only think about the last thing that you saw, and even anything that happens to you, really, by the time you go to bed, usually you go to bed, you only think about the last thing that happened to you at that night, or the last situation. If it was a bad situation, I mean, that's what you think about. So you have a visual picture. So yes, people do have a horrible picture of what's going on, and when you see people getting shot by the police, you're seeing people get shot by other people. I mean, at that point, it's creating an atmosphere within us at that time that we hadn't seen in a long time. Yes, ma'am.
I have a problem with this because it's not Facebook itself, it's news in general. Because the news is what makes people see these things. If they're not seeing it on the news or the Facebook, stuff like that, but it's actually the news media. How come we don't see more good stories about law enforcement? See, I work at DPS and I hear about all the good things that happens with law enforcement. We don't hear that on the news. We only hear the sensational stories about, you know, this person got shot, this person got killed, this 19-year-old walking around got killed. Why are we not hearing the good things that are happening? That's the problem with society. The news only gives us the sensational stories, not the good stories.
That was something that I think we're all subject to, right? We see the media, we see the media coverage, and you know it's important to know that applies to cops and to the civilians that they're serving, right? And so there's two sides of it. The cops are seeing all of this bad stuff happen too, and it's subconsciously it's affecting them too in the way that they do their job. So that's really it's really important. There's a really good author out there that just released a book. He's a Texas law enforcement officer. His name's Nick Selby. His book is In Context: Understanding Police Killings of Unarmed Civilians. It's a very even look at the 153 killings of unarmed people in this country last year. But he made a statement that I think sums up what you may be talking about, and what we're all seeing is that we're being led by a narrative and emotion rather than fact-based analysis of the data, right? And I think as a technologist, what I want the truth, and for me as a technologist, it comes through the data, so we can engage and draw our own conclusions. There's some problems with that in this country. The data sets aren't very good. They're getting better, but there's still a lot of work to be done. But yeah, yes, sir.
So I have a question, in full disclosure, I'm a former police officer a long time ago, and I've been in technology for close to 40 years. And thanks. My specific question goes back to the title of the session here, because I've also, in different jobs, worked for 3 different hosting and cloud providers. And early on when I was hosting, I talked to at least one FBI special agent a day, and it was usually CD. And they say, all right, we need the hard drive, right? And that actually, as much as a pain as that was easy. Because now when someone, when a U.S. assistant U.S. attorney says, we need the evidence for this. First of all, it's easy to say there's nothing to grab, but more specifically, there are ways to deal with it, but how are you encountering, if you are, the issue of chain of custody with data that no longer resides on a removable hard drive?
Well, actually, we're from a chain of custody standpoint, and you're more or less talking about how are we getting the evidence? Are we, is it easy to get? Actually, the technology community, they're working with us. They're working hand in hand. One of the reasons that we weren't working together at that time because we're two different institutions, we're two different cultures, we don't speak the same language, just like human beings that don't know each other. The law enforcement community and the IT community, they didn't know each other, they were scared of each other. So it probably didn't help when law enforcement, we would come in and we would tear down your whole network at that time because we thought we needed the whole network. And so you can understand the relationship at that time. But overall, though, to answer your question, yes, the relationship at this point right now is it's better than it's ever been. I think both elements know that they're going to need each other, and that's kind of where we are right now with digital, with being able to talk about evidence, chain of custody, and everything like that. It's even going to get even better, and that's why we're talking about DEMS. When we talk about DEMS and being able to make the evidence pure again. So we're making the evidence pure, which creates an element of integrity to the investigation. So even when we look at a company like Double Horn, when we see what they're doing and what they're going to do for police at that time, not only for police, but the community, all of that. It's about bringing integrity to every part of law enforcement, and that's going to be the problem. And that's what's going to get everybody back on page and get us to walking and get people to trust again. It's going to be the integrity that's going to be brought back by technology.
So one quick follow-up, are you finding judges are finally getting there too?
They're getting there. I just was talking about a case I just went on a couple of weeks ago. We won the case. It was a pretty technical case to most people in law enforcement that didn't have a background. I'll be real quick on this. We had a lady that was going on the dark net and she was purchasing stolen credit card numbers. And she was going out, and then after she went out, she was using the credit cards all over the place at that point. So one of the things that we did, we went in, but she was actually taking pictures and using these little territorial sites to sell the property. She was fencing it herself. So what we did was, we went back into her Facebook page, and we took a picture. We actually got all of the metadata, pulled it off of all of the pictures that she took, put it in GPS, put it in to Google Maps, and it took us to all the locations to where she took the pictures at. Most of the stuff was in the actual location where she purchased it at. We went back to the locations, we got video, we got all the transaction information, and we put her in jail on it. We offered her, the U.S. attorneys offered her 2 years because they really didn't understand the technology. They didn't think that the jury would understand it. She turned the 2 years down. We turned the 2 years into 25 years. So they do understand technology.
Was that publicly available Facebook photos of where the asset data from, or you got to get a warrant for that?
No, absolutely not. If they're saving, on Facebook, you can go to the default. Actually, it defaults into not actually logging the information at that point, but for some reason she had hers off, which we pulled the metadata off of the pictures at that time. And she had other pictures that we actually used also too. We pulled the metadata off of that also. But no, we did not. You didn't need a search warrant for that.
Anybody see the Verge article this week that talked about the FBI now having access to the full fire hose of Twitter data? They've entered into a relationship with Data. It's a company subsidiary, 5% owned by Twitter, and now that they can actually analyze all of Twitter in pretty much in real time. So, not casting judgment on whether that's good or bad, but it is obviously Twitter data for the most part is public anyway, right? So anybody can do that. Problem in the corporate world, when you try to do that, you get throttled, right? And so that's the self-limiting thing. But apparently, if you're a 3-letter agency and pay enough, you can get access. I'm sorry.
Good.
I don't want him to hurt me.
I think you're right. I blame TV too. It's TV's fault. And as a technologist, I looked back to TV and said, maybe I could find the solution. So when I started thinking about this, made me think of a Netflix show. Is anybody watching the show Black Mirror on Netflix? I've heard of it. This is kind of it's 15 minutes in the future kind of show with possibilities, what's going on and how technology is entering our lives and making certain impacts and kind of creating paranoia and all kinds of things. It's a disturbing, interesting show, worrisome show, right? And the first episode this season was called Nosedive, and basically the premise of the show was everybody went around and they had readily access to be able to rate one another in all their interactions. So think of it like Yelp for people, or Uber's probably the Uber rating system, right? So we could keep each other in check, right? And what a powerful app. Think about a policeman interaction with a citizen. If the police officer knew, to your point, that they would be videotaped, but we're going to be rated, camera in hand by the individual, that's a very powerful weapon. And in that show, the higher your rating, the better your standing in society. The lower your rating, you couldn't keep your job, couldn't rent a house, couldn't get on an airplane. So everybody was striving to have these high ratings to be able to, it was creating a lot of false sense of security. Now this accountability that goes back and forth between people, I could see that your life, but this type of application could ruin your life. So.
Well, that's right. I read this thing about a vegetarian going after this restaurant because they serve veal. They put the restaurant out of business to for these. She'd never ever eaten there. She lived across the country.
Yeah, so she just,
Absolutely.
our
Excellent.
news site, or you said Yelp has helped a young lady put somebody out of business. There's a restaurant.
Yeah, it was a political thing. She was
Right.
vegetarian and they served veal.
Yeah, that type of accountability when you're working with someone, it keeps you in check. You're going to be nicer and on your best behavior and so on. You're going to be hopefully the best person you can be.
Yeah, and we're starting to see cases like that to where we're having businesses that will call us at that point, and it's not against the law, and we have to tell them that they have a right at that point to judge their experience at your
But she
company.
had never been to visit them.
Well, at that point, that becomes civil at that point. That becomes a civil entity that does start to, it's not criminal at that point right there. So we are getting that. We get a lot of that. People call in. One of the bigger things we get is directing these Facebook fights. Oh my goodness. You wouldn't believe it. I mean, it's just amazing. And it's to the point to where we had to get some type of special order from the DA's office on how to handle these things. And these are, I mean, you wouldn't believe it. It's just some of the things that they're bringing to you is childish. He said this about me on Facebook. And one of the things that we tell them is that, hey, Facebook's not a right, it's a privilege. You don't, if you're not on there, you don't know about it. And that's kind of the way we have to treat it at that point. But if we see something where there is some type of threat, and we think the threat is true at that point, but you can't take the cases, or you'll just get overwhelmed with just working. You'll just have a Facebook police department at that point.
It doesn't exist. Yeah, there's no Facebook. All right, so we've been talking about technology and my app or other, body-worn cameras, that seems as new, but, we've been dealing with this for technology and police law enforcement for, over 100 years, radio communications, internet-enabled devices. So let's talk a little bit about how technology, I know we touched on it with body-worn cameras, how it's helping improve those law enforcement community relations.
Yeah, one of the things that I could, and just speaking, just for being out there and watching it, I mean, just in the early 90s, which a lot of things didn't even exist, even the internet didn't even exist at that point. But one of the things that it did at that point, it does give us an opportunity to give an opinion on who we really are as people sometimes. Now you're seeing all these police departments, they have Twitter accounts, they have Facebook pages, they have so many different things just to market themselves. And, Clark, we spoke on this. A lot of the times, the police department, they haven't marketed themselves. And a lot of times, the only time that you hear about the police is just like you said earlier, is when there's a negative story. And usually those are the stories that sell. Those are nice stories. But yes, technology overall, it will be the bridge that would take police all through the 21st century. And it'll take us all the way through. And I think it's going to make us more efficient. It's going to make us make better decisions. I think that our cases are going to be better, just like I spoke on the case earlier there. It's going to make us a pure police department. It's going to make us, and when we have our video cameras on, hey, we're gonna do the right thing. And I think that if that's the only way, and everyone's the same way. I mean, even when you were kids, you know, if your mother wasn't there, you're doing something you didn't have any business doing. And then the mom came in the door, you know, hey, you straighten up. And that's what the camera's kind of doing at that point right there. And if that's what we have to have at that point, just to get, just to get the public to trust us and understand, hey, we need it then. But also, it protects us from the public. I know you guys don't understand, probably won't agree with this. I'm not saying you won't agree with it, but you won't believe this. Sometimes the public, they don't tell the truth on officers at times.
Really?
And in that process, absolutely. And in that process, there's a lot of officers that are actually, a lot of the accusations that they're getting at these times, they are showing that, hey, they're not true. And so a lot of these officers that actually fought the video cameras, they won't leave the station without them now. And that's technology, and that's where we are today.
Yeah, no, that's a good point, Stan. One of the things that I'd point out is that for me, technology, particularly video, there's this thing called transparency, and transparency builds trust. And for me, it's that simple when it comes to video. And I think video highlights both the possibilities and the limitations of that statement, right? Because this year so far, less than 30% of the incidents resulting in death of an individual have been captured on video. So that means 70% of incidents are not recorded by video. Well, is that number low? I really don't know. I mean, we know what the stats are generally on how many agencies have body-worn cameras in the field and deployed. We know some of the metrics around that, but we really don't have good data points, and it's going to be a long time before that Netflix type scenario of ubiquitous video coverage where, you know, the drone is hovering above the officer and everything is captured, and we have total transparency for the entire end to end.
So I had a really quick question about that. I mean, I'm over here.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, no problem. So we've had somewhat of a taste of that with the dash cam videos. And admittedly, dash cams stay in the car, they're pointed in one direction, they don't move, that type of thing. But when they came out, what kinds of changes did you see in behavior for the officers, for what was happening in the courts? Because to me, that's a little bit of a predecessor or peek into what you're going to see with the personal cams.
Yeah, thank you for bringing that up, because my first experience in technology and law enforcement, since I was the technology guy going into law enforcement, if it came to any part of technology, I was in charge. So we implemented in the early 90s dash cams, right? And so we've been through all this before, policy and procedure and all of these things, but there are so many more aspects now that it's actually body worn, right? And it goes everywhere.
Yep.
And you know, we go from Austin has 1,500 police cars. They have, I don't know, 2,500 officers, something like that. So scale, and that's kind of when you talk about how cloud can help. But I think in general, police find them a valuable addition, and they support their use. There's been one study that came out this year that said officers that were wearing body-worn cameras reduced complaints by citizens by 93%. I think, and it's psychological, right? When people know that they're being observed, they tend to straighten up.
Absolutely.
Goes both ways. Cops, they know they're being recorded. They're going to tend to act better, and the citizens as well, apparently. And so I think we're going to continue to see that trend.
Did you see that trend when the dash cam videos came out?
Yes, absolutely, but to a much lesser degree, because field of view, it was just traffic stops.
Perfect.
It primarily helped with DWI enforcement, and to a lesser degree on the narcotics side, but primarily for traffic-related offenses.
Absolutely, and he's exactly right, and that's one of the things about the body cams also too. Not only does it help the relationship and it creates integrity with the transparency, it also is an awesome evidence to it at that point, because people say things sometimes, and they didn't mean to say, and so actually it does work at any officer's advantage at that time, even when you're prosecuting the case at that point right there. So
Plus, you
yes.
use it for training, right? You say, well, you could have handled the case better this way, because then you can see what happened.
That was one of the big benefits that we got from Dashcam initially was the visibility and improvement in law enforcement training as a result, because we were able to see critical incidents, we were able to take these back to the police officers and create entire curriculum around what this guy did right, what this guy did wrong, and now we've got that on steroids with body-worn camera video.
And another thing, one thing about all Dallas cars are actually audio and video. Actually, well, not inside the car. Yes, inside the car is video, especially in the back where the prisoner is at that point. So all the cars are video. Even when you're driving that car all day long, you're being taped all day long. Nothing is, everything there is wide open. And if there is an investigation or something goes, they will pull that evidence. I think she has a question.
Yes, the suspect was advised that the officer's wearing a recording device, and these are not violations of First Amendment
No,
at
ma'am.
all?
No, it's not at that point, because at that point, once you stop that person at that point, and they're not charged with a crime, if there's just reasonable suspicion at that point, and until you actually start to interrogate that person, then you start to read them their rights at that point. But usually, the patrol officer, they're not interrogating at that point. They're really not going to interrogate. And a lot of times, most Dallas detectives would tell them, don't read them their rights at that point, and don't interrogate them. Usually they won't, they'll tell them not to do that. Because usually, once they start to read them their rights at that point, then, oh man, this is scary. And usually, and it may not be a situation to where you're interrogating them at that point. But yes, but no, to your point, when you're out there, and hey, the world is free, you're talking, they're talking, no, you don't have to read them their rights at that point until you, at that point, put them under some type of custodial arrest at that point. But once you get to the point to where you're going to arrest them, from that time on, you need to begin to read them their rights, whether you're a detective or you are a police officer, regular police officer. Yes, sir.
Yeah, I have kind of a two-part. I don't fully understand today what the role of cloud is in terms of evidence management, but my question is, have you had any lessons learned in terms of ensuring that evidence is admissible?
Well, and that's a good point. And that's where technology is. It has to be challenged. And that's where we are in technology. And a lot of the cases where there's not a lot of cases, but the cases that are there, usually we look at the Ninth Circuit Court out in LA, they're tough. They're really tough on law enforcement. And usually they have the cases that they've had at that point, that's what we usually go by. That's our standard. And one of the things that when we were dumping cell phones, they stopped it immediately and said we have to get a warrant at that time. They did stop it at that point, even though we're looking at it at that point just like you were emptying a person's pockets. But the Ninth Circuit came back and said, no, that's just like a person's house. You need to get a search warrant. So that's how things are evolving. It's gonna continue to evolve. But no, me personally, I haven't actually had anything challenged, nor do I want anything challenged. Because usually that's a lawsuit. And I think your other question, he was talking
I'm
about.
glad my ears perked up around cloud. Thank you very much for saying C word. We're really happy about that. So with all this video that was introduced in the 80s and over the past 30 years, that started to fill up computers and offices with more computers, a lot of hard drive space. So the cloud has allowed a lot of these to be able to offset some of that. They don't need that physical location nor that hardware to be able to do it. Now, thankfully, over the past 5 years, a lot of the challenges that have come up around security, the cloud service providers have responded very well to it. And they've been able to bring in a lot of the compliance needed to protect children, to protect people, what's being held there in the infrastructure. Also, the software has come in around digital evidence management. It uses software that will take that video of that crime and associate it with that crime weapon that maybe, and that will be tracked through the entire process all the way to court for that chain of custody. Now, all this video that's being taken may not be required, if you will. That may be in something that can sit in cold storage, low and cheap. But the minute something happens where you've got an event, right, that's going to occur, that now becomes chain of custody and must be monitored accordingly. So the prosecutor can stand behind it. So when the judge looks at it and says, was it tainted? Did something happen? Did anything else? And software provides that level of tracking and provides that level of accountability and reporting so people can test that. And there's been a lot of cases now that's been challenged right away. And those who are smart enough to use that kind of digital evidence management software easily were able to sway a judge or a jury trial being able to show it.
And can I say one thing also too? And one of the things then, in what Vince talking about, it's an amazing tool because I've been in situations to where, and actually there was a huge drug scandal. If anybody knows anything about Dallas, please, there was a huge drug scandal about 20 years ago, and it was all about drugs. And one of the situations was that they had accused the officer of taking some of the drugs at that point, but what ended up happening was the drugs were a different weight at that time, but what eventually happened was the court, his defense attorney argued that the moisture that was in the drugs at that point had been removed from the drugs, which had actually lowered the weight on at that time. Pretty good argument at that point. But the problem was at that point, the people that had handled the drugs prior to that at that point, a lot of them didn't sign it out, they didn't sign out, and it wasn't matching up. Now, with digital evidence management, you won't have that problem. Anybody that touches that evidence, or anyone, if it goes to the DA's office, there's a stamp on that. And that, it'll create a report. You can take the report, you don't even need to pull the drugs out anymore. You can destroy the drugs because you're gonna have, once the drugs go down and they get tested at that point, then a sample's gonna be set aside there, and there's gonna be a marking, and there's gonna be a barcode that's actually gonna have that. Absolutely. So you see what I mean when I talk about integrity, purity, that's what DIMS will do for the actual case at that point. And you won't have these problems anymore. And when you have, in drug cases, I've worked narcotics before, when you got a guy dead to rights, you gotta go after the drugs. You gotta go after the officer. You have to go after them. That's all you have at that point. This will eliminate it at that point.
And a follow-up question to the gentleman's point earlier about it used to be, not that long ago, it used to be that, someone from the FBI or the company would say, we need a hard drive or the entire
Yes, sir.
tower.
Right. Thank you. We need the hard drive or the entire tower for this forensic investigation. Now, when we're talking about data in the cloud, everything is a forensic copy, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because you can't pull AWS and bring it into a cardboard box in the Dallas FBI office. So,
Absolutely.
have you seen or encountered anything in a court case where the fact that everything is intrinsically just a forensic copy, you've never had physical evidence and you cannot produce physical evidence? Is that a stumbling block in prosecution at any point?
No.
Did you just say, no, we made what is digitally a complete, exact copy of this data?
No, actually, no. What's happened now is that the relationship between law enforcement and the IT community and the business community in general at that point, we will go in and we'll sit down and talk and see what's reasonable. You are running a business, and that's what happened to law enforcement at that time. One of the things about law enforcement, we didn't understand technology, and we went in, and it was good to take everything so you didn't miss anything. So I think now we're starting to see these things called chief security officers, and these guys are standing out on the front. They are the liaison between the police and the business at that point right there. So you get this relationship that goes on. Now, to answer that question at that point, usually If it is a situation, depending on the situation at that point, if the case can't go on without it, usually both parties will work together. And I have seen situations to where the entire network has actually been imaged at that point, which takes days and days and days. But I have seen that happen before. But usually the two parties are working together.
But I think to your point, in AWS, you're not going to image all of AWS, and I would say that the techniques have changed more than the core processes. So now we're going in and we're getting, VDMKs and snap.
I dropped that, I didn't have that on my to-do list, that would have been a great idea.
Oh, ELTech won't do that. Okay, so if you do see a form come into your email, please